Like and subscribe, and I'll tell you all about my M1 Carbine. If you were carrying a 1911 and you're in a combat situation, I want something a little bit more range, with a little more firepower. I want something a little easier to shoot accurately. I love this gun, but I want something bigger and something better. I've got my M1 Garand. It's big, it's heavy. It shoots this big giant bullet, shoots a heavy round. I love it, but I want something a little bit smaller. How do you fill this gap? And the solution to fill that gap, to fill that void between, you got a big battle rifle and you got a handgun. What goes in the middle? The M1 Carbine. This is it. About halfway between an M1 Garand and a 1911 is the M1 Carbine. This filled that void. It was never meant to replace either. This was just to fill that gap in between the two. If a frontline soldier needed a battle rifle, he had the M1 Garand. If someone who's in supply and way behind the lines, he had that M1911, that 45. Someone who was in between, maybe an artilleryman or a mortarman, someone who may have had a role that might require him to shoot at some enemies and still have a lightweight, easy to carry, portable, easy to manipulate. There's the M1 Carbine. It filled that gap between the handgun and the battle rifle. Most countries, when they made a carbine, they shortened their battle rifle. If you look at, say for example, the Lee Enfield, well, they shortened the Jungle Carbine. They just shortened the barrel, lightened up the gun. You look at something like a Mosin Nagant, the 38s, they just shortened a Mosin Nagant. The M1 Carbine is not a shortened Garand. It's a completely different action, completely different caliber, completely different rifle. It's a whole different gun. There are no parts that swap from one gun to the other. The M1 Carbine is its own beast. It shoots a 30 carbine round, a 110 grain bullet at about 1950 feet per second. Nothing like that 30-06 that was shooting a 150 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second. It's, like I said, it filled that gap between the battle rifle and between the pistol. This particular gun was made by Inland Division of General Motors. When General Motors made guns, yes they did. So did IBM, so did National Postal Meter. As the one I have behind me, this was made by Rockola, who made jukeboxes. As part of the war effort, you had 10 different manufacturers of M1 carbines. Everybody, Winchester obviously made them. As part of the war effort, companies, manufacturers that were manufacturing other items were turned to manufacturing guns, and to show the capability of the American might of ingenuity and their manufacturing capabilities, they were able to turn out 6.1 million of these in 3 years. It's just incredible. They were made for the 3 years, and that was it. They stopped production. But the gun continued service all the way through Vietnam. This gun was in service right up till 1973. Basically unchanged. There were a few changes, and we'll talk about that right now. This, I said, is a World War II version. And late in World War II, 1944, they went from this, what is the flip sight? The flip sight, that L-shaped flip sight. One aperture is set for 150 yards, the other is set for 300 yards. And you'd flip from one to the other. That's your battle sight. So around 1944, they go, well, that's not good enough. Let's go to an adjustable sight. So we went to the adjustable sights. And this is set, it's 100, 200, 300, all up to 500 yards. And it's also windage adjustable, where that L flip sight is not. In 1945, they went from this little skinny band, or this little skinny band where that's your sling attachment, and that's your band that holds the gun together. They went from that little skinny band to a wide band You see the difference there, the wide band, and it also incorporated a bayonet lug. So you had now the capability of putting on a bayonet on this little carbine. So that was around 1945, and then also somewhere in there, that 44, 45, we went from what was a push button safety. There's a little push button there, right behind the magazine release. That little push button. Someone decided that there's a push button for the magazine release and a push button for the safety, and they were just too close together. It was kind of confusing, if that's possible. You confuse those two in the heat of battle. Maybe I'm ejecting my mag when I meant to take it off safety. So what they did is they went with this little toggle switch. And you can see the little toggle switch here. And that just, now I have a little switch going, from safe to fire. So I'm not confusing that with my mag release. So those are the three big changes when you went from that early war to the late war. So if you were in Korea, you would see that later version. You saw the adjustable sight, you saw the you saw the bayonet lug, and you also saw that little toggle switch for the safety. So that's like the Korean War version, and that World War II version. Let's say early World War II was that bare bones looking one. In the Korean War, also brought about another change. They had the M2. The M2 is a select fire version of the M1 Carbine. So you had this little 15 round magazine. Well, once you went to select fire and this became full auto with an M2 version, just wasn't enough ammo. So you went with a 30 round magazine. And we talked about this before. This is probably where the term banana clip comes from. It's kind of shaped like a banana, about the size of a banana, and it held 30 rounds. So now when you have an M2 and you're going full auto, I've got twice the firepower, a little more practical. So a lot of your Korean War era and later Vietnam era, you would have that 30 round magazine. So this would be your Korean version, and the other would be that World War II version. You now have the adjustable sights, you've got a bayonet lug, you've got a toggle safety, you've got a 30 round magazine. This was the improved version of the M1 Carbine. We're going to handheld, so I apologize for the kind of wobbling or shaking. But here you can see there's that push button safety, and we'll compare that to the toggle. Let's see, that would be forward and back, whereas this safety was a push on and push off. You can see how that is awful close to that magazine release. So you would want, I guess it would make sense, you wouldn't want two push buttons right side by side. The sights, we'll take a look at this one here. There's that L. This is the flip sight. There's a 300 yard and there's a 150 yard range. And that's the only adjustment you really had with the sights in the original carbines. This one has a sliding scale, and you can see the yardage on there. And it's also, it has a knob for the windage adjustment. If we move forward, you'll see, the bayonet lug had to be held on with a very substantial front band, and we'll compare that to kind of what was the much more thinner, little skinnier band. The additional band didn't change the spring, didn't change the stock. We just made a bigger band here would support that bayonet lug. Another thing, kind of interesting, and I don't know, maybe someone can help me out with this one. But you see the large opening here for the op rod. And we look here on the older one, much smaller, kind of a higher wall on that bottom piece of that stock piece, much smaller opening when we compare that to the later one. And I don't know if this was a age thing or a time thing or just different manufacturer, different company making stocks. So if someone knows more about this, can maybe fill me in there. And then there's that butt pouch again. This one has that really cool cartouche, that Springfield Arms. And it should have a P, that proof. There it is. There's that P stamped into the stock for the proof mark. This one has no markings on it, so it may be a much later stock. So early World War II, this was the version of the M1 Carbine you would have seen. It's kind of let's say the bare bones stripped down, streamlined version. Has that L flipped up sight. Has the two push buttons. It has just a nice empty bar, very clean lines, very simple not a whole lot to it. You pull the bolt back, you let her rip, you got 15 rounds of fire. 5.2 pounds, lightweight, very kind of comfortable little shooter. Easy to carry, easy to manipulate, didn't take up a lot of space, didn't take up a lot of weight. This is like I said, this is what they came up with to fill that void between the handgun and the long gun. The M1 Carbine evolved. it evolved to this. All right, so now we've got that 30 round mag. We have that. It's got a bayonet on. It's got the M4 bayonet. It's got that toggle switch safety. It has the adjustable sights. It has that bayonet mount to the barrel. It's a little bit heavier now. There's a lot more to it. I've got a 30 round mag. This is now your Vietnam version. This is now your Korean War version. This is what the M1 Carbine evolved into. I don't know what more you can put on there. Maybe find some kind of optics or something. But we went from that lightweight, streamlined little carbine. Now this thing's, I'm feeling a little bit of heft to it, especially with that 30 round mag. And I have the pouch on it, which carries a couple of spare 15 round magazines. So I guess I got a little bit of backup there. But now this is now a heavy thing. It's still a carbine. It's still a lot lighter than the Grand, but it's got a lot more to it than what we originally started with. Say, for example, you're a radio operator in World War II. Would you rather be carrying this than a 1911? Hey, it's a little bit longer, it's a little bit heavier, but I've got a lot more firepower, I've got a lot more range. It's still lightweight, it's still easy to pack. And it's much lighter than the M1 Garand. I think this, for a lot of situations, this was probably the gun you want to be carrying. If I was on a front line and I was in a forward fighting, a foxhole, I'd want that Garand. I want that long range. I want that high power. If I'm mobile and I'm carrying something else in addition to my weapon, this is a good weapon to be carrying. I think it filled that gap between the 1911 and that 30-06 M1 Garand. Is it the perfect rifle? Oh, hell no! But it sure did fill that gap. It's a great little shooter. It's a lot of fun to have. Great history behind these. Like I said, they only made them from 1942 to 1945, and they made 6.1 million of them. They've fought in every war since then. You see, I mean, everyone from every guerrilla to Malcolm X to Che Guevara probably had an M1 carbine. Like I said, it's not perfect, but like I said, it filled that gap and filled that void, and still a really nice rifle to have if you needed to have a rifle.